02:47 a.m., November 14, 1941. Lieutenant Commander Werner Freiherr von Rittberg peered through the periscope of his U-boat, U-209, into the pitch-black night of the North Atlantic. What he saw made his heart skip a beat. 3 British warships, 2 destroyers and a light cruiser, in perfect formation, 200 meters away. This was the moment every U-boat commander trained for his entire life. But it was also the moment that would send most U-boats to the bottom of the ocean. Von Rittberg knew in that instant that the next 90 minutes would either etch his name into the history books or condemn him and his 47-man crew to an icy grave 4,000 meters below the surface. He had 6 torpedoes on board, 3 ships, no room for error. The British commanders had no idea they were about to become pawns in one of the war's most daring games of chess. A game only one man could win, the ghost of the Atlantic. The situation that November 14, 1941, was desperate for the German Navy. The Royal Navy had sunk 23 U-boats in the past 3 months. 43% of the German U-boat fleet lost. 1,127 German U-boat men resting on the Atlantic floor. British anti-submarine warfare had improved dramatically. ASDIC sonar, improved depth charges, aerial surveillance by Sunderland flying boats, convoy escorts with seasoned commanders. The odds of a single U-boat even sinking a guarded merchant ship were around 12%. The chances of sinking 3 warships in a single night without being detected were so low, the German Navy listed them as 0% in planning documents. Statistically impossible, but Lieutenant Commander Werner von Rittberg was no statistical average. The 29-year-old commander from Hamburg had something the British would later describe in secret Admiralty reports as an almost supernatural ability. He could feel where a ship would be before it even knew where it was going. His crew called him the Ghost. The British would soon call him the Shadow Wolf. On this November morning, 437 kilometers west of Ireland, both names would find their terrible confirmation. 02:47 a.m. U-209 lay at a depth of 30 meters, almost completely silent. The 3 British warships were moving in a zigzag formation, standard anti-submarine tactics. HMS Harvester, an H-class destroyer, HMS Highlander, also H-class, and HMS Naiad, a Dido-class light cruiser. Combined, these 3 ships possessed the firepower to obliterate U-209 100 times over: 16 4-inch guns, 32 2-pounder anti-aircraft guns, 180 depth charges, 647 men, all trained to do one thing: kill U-boats. Commander Richard Stannard on the HMS Harvester had personally sunk 3 German U-boats. He was one of the Royal Navy's most dangerous anti-submarine commanders. Captain Geoffrey Barnard on the HMS Naiad had successfully fought off 5 U-boat contacts. These men were not novices, they were hunters. And yet, on this morning, they would become the prey. Von Rittberg studied their movements. For 14 minutes, absolute silence in the U-boat. Only the quiet hum of the electric motors, the creaking of the pressure hull, the breath of 48 men. Then he saw it. The moment, the microscopically small gap in their formation. For 0.7 seconds, both destroyers would turn to starboard simultaneously, while the cruiser maintained its course. In that 0.7 seconds, there would be a direct line of sight, 2,800 meters, precisely the optimal range for a G7E torpedo. Von Rittberg whispered his command: "Tube 1, ready to fire." His first chess move had been made. The British knew nothing. 02:53 a.m. The first G7E torpedo left tube 1 of U-209 at 30 knots, 2,143 meters to the target. Time to impact, 3 minutes and 17 seconds. Von Rittberg immediately swung the periscope to HMS Highlander. He now had 2 minutes and 40 seconds before the first torpedo struck. 2 minutes and 40 seconds before the entire British formation went to high alert. He had to fire the second torpedo within that window. But there was a problem. HMS Highlander was now on a different course. The zigzag route had changed. The pre-calculated interception angle was useless. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann, the watch officer, whispered the new data. Distance 3,100 meters. Speed 18 knot. Course 247 degrees. Von Rittberg closed his eyes. 3 seconds. He didn't see the periscope image. He saw something else. He saw the next 4 minutes like a film playing in his mind. He saw where HMS Highlander would be, not where she was, where she would be. Eyes open, tube 2, fire, 02:55 AM, 2 torpedoes in the water. The first was now 1 minute and 34 seconds from HMS Harvester. On board the British destroyer, no one had the slightest idea that death was coming for them at 30 knots. Lieutenant Commander James Fletcher stood on the bridge, drinking tea. He was thinking about his wife, Margaret, in Portsmouth. He would see her again in 3 weeks when HMS Harvester returned for a refit. He would never see her again. 02:56 AM and 17 seconds. 280 kilograms of hexanite explosives slammed into HMS Harvester on the starboard side, directly beneath the forward magazine. The explosion tore a 12-meter-wide hole in the hull. Water poured into the destroyer at 340 tons per minute. The forward 4-inch gun was hurled 47 meters into the air by the force of the blast, landing in the sea. 23 British sailors died instantly. On HMS Naiad, Commander Geoffrey Barnard was jolted awake. His first thought, U-boat attack. His second, where the hell is it? His third thought never came. Because at that exact moment, 02:56 AM and 39 seconds, the second torpedo from U-209 struck HMS Highlander amidships. The detonation broke the destroyer's back. Literally. The 98-meter-long ship buckled upwards in the middle like a toy. Captain Michael Phipps, who had rushed to the bridge, saw something his mind couldn't process. 2 of his ships hit within 22 seconds. Impossible. No U-boat could be that precise. No commander was that good. It had to be 2 U-boats. Maybe 3. He screamed into the voice tube. Full speed ahead. Rudder hard to port. Depth charge pattern delta. ASDIC full sweep. Find them now. But no one found anything, because U-209 had already vanished. Von Rittberg had taken the U-boat down to a depth of 90 meters immediately after the second torpedo. Total silence. All non-essential systems shut down. Not even the fans were running. The temperature inside the U-boat climbed to 90 degrees Fahrenheit in just 8 minutes. Sweat poured down the men's faces, but no one moved. No one spoke. 48 men literally held their breath. On the surface, 300 feet above them, all hell was breaking loose. HMS Naiad executed a hard turn, dropping 16 depth charges in a circular pattern. The detonations rocked U-209 like an earthquake. Instruments flew from their mountings. Light bulbs shattered. A leak sprang in a weld in the control room. Water began to seep in, 2 liters a minute. Chief Mechanic Wilhelm Brandt immediately crawled to it, attempting to seal the leak with an emergency patch. No one said a word. The second salvo of depth charges hit. Closer. Much closer. U-209 rolled 11 degrees to starboard. Men grabbed for handholds. The pressure hull groaned, a sound like a dying whale. Petty Officer Franz Weber began to pray softly. Our Father, who art in heaven. Von Rittberg glared at him, said nothing, but his eyes said it all. Not yet, Franz. Not yet. We're not finished yet. The third salvo, even closer. The sonar ping of HMS Naiad echoed through the hull, a sound that every U-boat man feared more than anything. Ping, pause, ping, pause, ping. They were hunting. They knew U-209 was down there somewhere, but they didn't know where. 03.14 hours. 18 minutes after the first torpedo strike, HMS Harvester was sinking, bow first. In 4 minutes and 32 seconds, the destroyer vanished beneath the waves. 116 men went with her. 71 survived, drifting in the ice-cold water. HMS Highlander still floated, broken in two. But both halves remained afloat, held together by watertight bulkheads that were holding. The crew fought desperately to salvage what they could. HMS Naiad circled, searching, dropping more depth charges, 43 in total. But all missed, because U-209 didn't move. Von Rydberg had done something British anti-submarine doctrine deemed impossible. He stayed right where he'd attacked, 300 feet down, directly beneath the sinking wrecks. The ASDIC sonar of HMS Naiad couldn't distinguish between the echo of a U-boat and the echo of 4,000 tons of sinking steel. Von Rydberg was hiding in the shadow of his own victims. It was ingenious. It was ice-cold. It was the only way to survive, and he wasn't finished yet. 03:47 hours, almost exactly 1 hour after the first attack. HMS Naiad hadn't given up the search, but Commander Barnard had another problem. 71 survivors from HMS Harvester were drifting in the water. The water temperature was 45 degrees Fahrenheit. In 30 minutes, they would start to die. In 60 minutes, most would be dead. He had to rescue them, but that meant holding HMS Naiad stationary. A stationary warship was the perfect target for any U-boat commander. Barnard had no choice. He gave the order. HMS Naiad began recovering the survivors, reducing speed to 4 knots. Almost dead in the water, 300 feet below them, von Rydberg slowly opened his eyes. He'd sat there for 47 minutes with his eyes closed, perfectly still, perfectly calm, waiting, feeling, listening not with his ears, but with something deeper. Now he nodded to the hydrophone operator. Petty Officer Heinrich Bauer put on his headphones, listened, 30 seconds. Then he whispered, "A ship." Engine noise almost stopped. Distance difficult to determine, but close, very close. Presumed rescue operation. Von Rydberg knew immediately what was happening. HMS Naiad was rescuing the survivors. That meant no zigzagging, no speed, no defenses. A sitting duck. He had 4 torpedoes left. He needed only 1, but he needed a position. He had to raise the periscope. The risk was enormous. If even 1 British sailor saw the periscope, HMS Naiad would maneuver immediately, and U-209 would be buried under depth charges. Von Rydberg made his decision in 0.3 seconds. Periscope depth. Slowly. Very slowly. U-209 rose like a ghost from the depths. 300 feet, 260 feet, 230 feet, 160 feet, 50 feet, 15 feet. Periscope depth. Von Rydberg raised the periscope for exactly 4 seconds. What he saw was burned into his brain. HMS Naiad, 1,500 yards away, perfectly broadside. Men on deck pulling survivors from the water. The ship was practically motionless. It was a gift, a terrible, tragic gift. Periscope down. Tube 3. Target data. Range 1,500 yards. Speed 3 knots. Course 190 degrees. Torpedo travel time 2 minutes 1 second. Torpedo depth 4 meters. Von Rydberg hesitated for a heartbeat. On the deck of HMS Naiad, British sailors were rescuing German U-boat victims, men who may have been attacking his comrades only yesterday. But they were rescuing them anyway, because it was the right thing to do, the human thing to do. And now he was about to kill them for it. The war forced so many impossible decisions. This was one of them. Fire. 04:05 hours and 47 seconds. The third torpedo from U-209 struck HMS Naiad on the port side, directly beneath the forward engine room. The explosion was devastating. The light cruiser had thinner armor than a destroyer, built for speed, not survivability. Water poured in uncontrollably. Captain Geoffrey Barnard knew immediately that his ship was lost. He shouted the orders. "All hands abandon ship. Launch lifeboats and rafts. Send a mayday signal." But there was a problem. HMS Naiad had just taken on board 71 survivors from HMS Harvester. Now those men who had just been rescued from the freezing Atlantic had to jump back in. Some of them refused. They couldn't go back in the water. Not again. British sailors forcibly carried them to the life rafts. Within 19 minutes, HMS Naiad sank. 3,200 tons of steel vanished beneath the waves. 142 British sailors died. 71 survivors from HMS Harvester survived a second time. They would later recount that they died twice that night and were reborn twice. Some would also recount that while they were drifting in the water, they saw a periscope. Just for seconds. It rose from the water, 200 yards away, and then it vanished again. Some swore that in that moment they felt someone was watching them, someone making sure they survived. Years later, a British survivor, Commander Peter Matthews, would say in an interview, "The Shadow Wolf could have killed us all. We were helpless in the water. But he didn't. He sank our ships. But he spared our lives. That was warfare of the old code, honor among enemies. I hate him for what he did, but I respect him more than any man I've ever known." U-209 submerged to 400 feet, 15 minutes after the third torpedo struck, heading west. Away from the British coast, away from the convoy routes, away from the hell they had just unleashed. In the control room, von Rydberg sat motionless. His hands were trembling, just slightly, but they were trembling. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann noticed it, said nothing. After 17 minutes, von Rydberg stood up, walked through the U-boat from bow to stern, spoke with every single man, thanked each one, calling everyone by name. When he reached the torpedo room, he found machinist Franz Weber, the man who had prayed during the depth charge attack. Weber stood staring at the empty torpedo tubes, tears streaming down his face. Von Rydberg placed a hand on his shoulder. "I know, Franz. I know." Weber turned around, his voice cracking. "We just killed hundreds of men, Lieutenant Commander. Hundreds." Von Rydberg nodded slowly. "Yes, we have. And hundreds of German men will go home tonight because these 3 warships can no longer hunt U-boats. That's the trade, Franz. That's the terrible, inhumane trade." Weber wiped his eyes. "How do you live with it, Lieutenant Commander? How do you sleep?" Von Rydberg looked at him. His eyes were empty, dead from the inside. "I don't sleep, Franz. I haven't slept in 3 months. Not really." He turned and walked back to the control room. Franz Weber would later write in his diary, "That night, I understood something. The lieutenant commander was the best U-boat commander in the German Navy, but he paid a price that none of us could see. He carried the burden for us all. He was the ghost of the Atlantic, but ghosts are dead men walking, and in his eyes I saw a man who had already died." News of the triple sinking reached the British Admiralty in London at 07:23 hours on November 14, 1941. The reaction was shock, not just over the loss of 3 warships, but over the manner. A single U-boat, a single night, 3 warships, 0 sonar contacts before the attacks, 0 depth charge hits. The enemy had escaped, without even being detected. It was operationally impossible, but it had happened. Admiral Sir Percy Noble, Commander-in-Chief Western Approaches, immediately called an emergency meeting. The Royal Navy's best anti-U-boat experts filled the room. Admiral Noble placed 3 reports on the table: HMS Harvester, HMS Highlander, HMS Naiad, all sunk within 69 minutes. He looked around the room, his voice ice cold. "Gentlemen, we have a problem. We haven't just lost a U-boat, we have lost control of the North Atlantic. If a single German commander can sink 3 of our warships without us even knowing where he is, then they can do it again and again. And again. We need to overhaul our entire anti-U-boat doctrine immediately." Commander James Ruck Keane, the leading ASDIC expert, spoke up. "Sir, the analysis of the attacks shows something extraordinary. The U-boat commander hid directly beneath the sinking wrecks after the first 2 torpedoes. Our ASDIC couldn't distinguish him from the wreckage echo. That's not in the German U-boat manuals. That's not standard tactics. That's individual genius." Admiral Noble nodded slowly. "Then find out who he is, find out which U-boat, and find a way to stop him. Because if we don't, we will lose this war." It took 7 weeks for British naval intelligence to identify U-209 and Lieutenant Commander Werner von Rittberg. What they discovered froze their blood. Von Rittberg had sunk 19 Allied ships in 11 months, 87,000 tons. But that wasn't the terrifying part. The terrifying part was his success rate. 19 attacks, 19 sinkings, a 100% success rate. He had never missed, never. The average success rate of German U-boat commanders was 31%. Von Rittberg was at 100%. It was statistically beyond all probability. A secret report from the British Naval Intelligence Division, dated January 8, 1942, stated, "Lieutenant Commander Werner Freiherr von Rittberg represents the single greatest threat to Allied shipping in the Atlantic. His tactical abilities surpass anything we have seen from German U-boat commanders to date. He is unpredictable, precise, and seemingly capable of anticipating our movements before we even know them ourselves." Personal analysis. Von Rittberg does not fight like a soldier. He fights like a chess player. Every move is planned 20 moves in advance. Recommendation: highest priority for neutralization. Special anti-U-boat group exclusively for U-209. Codename Operation Ghost Hunter. The Royal Navy formed a special unit, 6 destroyers, 3 frigates, 8 Sunderland flying boats, all with a single objective: find U-209, find the Shadow Wolf, kill him before he strikes again. But von Rittberg had already disappeared. U-209 did not reappear on British radar for the next 3 months. No attacks, no sightings, nothing. It was as if he had become a real ghost. The truth was more complex. U-209 was in Brest, France, undergoing a shipyard overhaul. But Werner von Rittberg was not on board. He was in a naval hospital in Hamburg. Official diagnosis: exhaustion. Unofficial diagnosis: a complete nervous breakdown. The ghost of the Atlantic was broken. The naval physician, senior staff physician Dr. Friedrich Lehmann, wrote in his confidential report of February 3, 1942, "Lieutenant Commander von Rittberg suffers from severe sleep disorders, recurring nightmares, and conditions that I can only describe as dissociative episodes. He talks in his sleep. In English, he recites names, British names, crew lists of ships he has sunk. He has memorized them, all 1,247 names. Every man who died by his torpedoes, he carries them with him. In his nightmares, he sees them all, floating in the water, looking at him. Asking why, my medical assessment, Lieutenant Commander von Rittberg is unfit for further U-boat operations. Recommendation: land-based assignment, teaching duties, no frontline deployments. But there was a problem. Werner von Rittberg was the most successful U-boat commander in the German Navy at a time when Germany desperately needed successes. Propaganda Minister Goebbels had already reported on the 3 warships in one night. Von Rittberg was a hero, a national hero. You couldn't just put a national hero in an office. Grand Admiral Dönitz, commander of the U-boat forces, personally flew to Hamburg. He visited von Rittberg in the hospital. What was discussed there remained a secret, but 3 days later, von Rittberg was released. He returned to U-209. As he came aboard, his crew immediately noticed the change. Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann later wrote, "The lieutenant commander who returned from Hamburg was not the man who had left. His eyes were harder, colder, he spoke less, never smiled. It was as if someone had taken something essential out of him. His humanity, perhaps. What remained was a perfect war machine, efficient, precise, deadly, but no longer truly alive." U-209 set sail again on March 7, 1942. The next 7 months were a masterclass in U-boat warfare. Von Rittberg sank another 14 ships, but the night of November 14, 1941 was never repeated. Never again 3 warships. Never again the perfect attack. Perhaps he didn't want to. Perhaps he couldn't. On October 23, 1942, 11 months after that legendary night, U-209 was located by HMS Vanquisher, a V-class destroyer northwest of Ireland. The depth charge hunt lasted 7 hours. Finally, U-209 was heavily damaged and forced to surface. What happened next surprised everyone. Von Rittberg gave the order: abandon U-boat, all men overboard, set demolition charges, U-209 will not be captured by the British. His crew abandoned the sinking U-boat. Life rafts were launched, and then Werner von Rittberg stood for a moment on the bridge, alone, looking at the sea. At HMS Vanquisher, which was closing in. At his swimming men, Lieutenant Klaus Hartmann shouted from a life raft, "Lieutenant Commander, come on, now!" Von Rittberg turned around, looked at him, smiled, for the first time in months, and then he went below, back into the U-boat. Klaus Hartmann screamed in desperation, "No, Lieutenant Commander, no!" But it was too late. 90 seconds later, U-209 exploded. Werner Freiherr von Rittberg, the ghost of the Atlantic, the shadow wolf, went down with his boat. He was 30 years old. 46 men from U-209 were rescued by HMS Vanquisher. The captain of HMS Vanquisher was Commander Michael Thornton, an experienced anti-U-boat officer. When he learned which U-boat he had sunk, which commander, he turned pale. He had the German prisoners brought before him, asked for Lieutenant Hartmann. Hartmann stepped forward. Commander Thornton looked at him for a long time. Then he spoke. "Your captain was the best U-boat commander we have ever encountered. He sank 3 of our ships in one night, killed hundreds of my comrades. I should be glad he's dead, but I'm not. War wastes the best of us. On both sides, I'm sorry for your loss." Klaus Hartmann could not speak. Tears ran down his face. Finally, he whispered. He could no longer live with what he had done. He carried them all the names, all the faces. It broke him. Commander Thornton nodded slowly. Then he died as a man with honor, more than we can ask for in war. The story of Lieutenant Commander Werner von Rittberg and the night of November 14, 1941, remained largely unknown for decades, partly out of German modesty, partly out of British embarrassment. It wasn't until 1978, when British war archives were partially declassified, that the full story came to light. What was discovered was remarkable. The British Admiralty document, ADM 223187, released in 1978, contained a complete analysis of the attacks of November 14, 1941. The conclusions were shocking. Quote, "The attacks by U-209 on HMS Harvester, HMS Highlander, and HMS Naiad represent the highest level of U-boat warfare achieved in World War II. Lieutenant Commander von Rittberg demonstrated tactical abilities that our doctrine deemed impossible. His ability to anticipate our movements, his cold-bloodedness under extreme pressure, his innovative use of wreck shadows to escape. All of this forced us to revise our entire anti-U-boat strategy. Without the adjustments forced by his tactics, we might have lost the Battle of the Atlantic. Paradoxically, his genius helped us win the war." Technical analysis also revealed something remarkable. The 3 torpedo shots by von Rittberg were mathematically near perfect. The first torpedo hit HMS Harvester 0.3 meters from the calculated optimal impact point. The second hit HMS Highlander 0.7 meters from the optimum. The third hit HMS Naiad 0.2 meters from the optimum. On average, 0.4 meters deviation, on shots over 1,400 to 2,800 meters, with moving targets, in complete darkness, with manual calculation, the error rate was 0.017%. Modern computer-aided torpedo systems of the 1970s achieved an error rate of 0.031%. Werner von Rittberg was more precise than computers, with nothing but his mind, his intuition, and his periscope. In 1983, a small, inconspicuous memorial was erected in Hamburg, not for victories, not for heroism, but for the 30,000 German U-boat men who died in World War II. 75% of all German U-boat crews never returned. It was the highest casualty rate of all German armed forces. The memorial bears 30,000 names. One of them, Werner Freiherr von Rittberg. In 1987, an elderly British gentleman visited the memorial. He stood for a long time before one name, Commander Peter Matthews, the man who had drifted in the water as a survivor of HMS Naiad. The man who swore he had seen a periscope watching them. The man who said, "The Shadow Wolf spared our lives." Matthews laid a small British flag before the memorial, then a German one. A German journalist who happened to be present asked him why. Matthews' voice was quiet. "Frail. Because he was my enemy, but not a monster. Because he fought his war with honor. As much as honor can exist in hell. Because in the end, he could no longer bear the burden and chose to die with his deeds rather than live with them." I can understand that. God knows I have my nightmares too. We all do. We all carry our dead. The journalist asked, "If you could meet him today, what would you say?" Matthews thought for a long time. Then, "I would say that the night of November 14th, 1941, taught me that war does not create heroes. War only creates survivors and the dead. And sometimes, the survivors are the most broken. You were brilliant, Werner. You were deadly, and you paid for it with your soul. Rest in peace, Ghost of the Atlantic. You have already served your sentence." Today, more than 80 years after that November night, the operation is still studied in naval academies worldwide. The U.S. Naval Academy in Annapolis has a complete case study. The Royal Navy Submarine School features a 3-hour seminar on the tactical innovations. The German Naval School Mürwik has a room dedicated to Werner von Rittberg, not for glorification, but to remember the costs, the price people pay when they become too good at killing. In 2019, a German-British research team conducted an expedition to the wrecks, HMS Harvester, HMS Highlander, HMS Naiad, and U-209. All 4 lie relatively close together, 272 miles west of Ireland, in 13,180 feet of water. The ROV cameras filmed the wrecks, ghostly shadows in the deep. HMS Harvester lies on its side, The hole from the torpedo still visible, HMS Highlander in two pieces, HMS Naiad upright, almost intact, and 875 yards away. U-209. The conning tower is torn off, the pressure hull breached. But on the seabed, next to the wreck, the cameras found something. The logbook of U-209 in a waterproof box, preserved by the pressure and the cold. It was recovered, restored. The last entry, written by Werner von Rittberg on October 23, 1942, 3 hours before U-209 was sunk, reads, "We are located. HMS Vanquisher is hunting us. Crew is tired but ready. I told the men we fight until the end. But the truth is, I'm glad it's ending. I have 1,247 names in my head. I hear them every night. They're calling me. Soon I will join them. Maybe I will find peace there. Maybe they will forgive me. Maybe not. But I must know. Klaus, if you read this, and I know you will, because you always survive, tell my mother that I did my duty until the end. Tell her I didn't let the men down. But don't tell her the whole truth. Let her believe I died a hero. She doesn't need to know that heroes are often just men who are too exhausted to keep running. The ghost of the Atlantic is tired. He wants to go home. These aren't just numbers from dusty archives. These are real men, real nights, real nightmares. The night of November 14th, 1941, changed U-boat warfare forever. It showed what was possible, but it also showed the price. 323 British sailors died that night. Hundreds more carried the scars. Werner von Rittberg and his crew paid with their humanity, and ultimately, their lives. There are no winners in stories like these, only different degrees of loss. If these historical truths are important to you, if you believe these stories need to be told, not for glorification but for remembrance, then support with YouTube's Super Thanks, the golden heart below. Every Super Thanks allows me to spend weeks in naval archives, digitizing logbooks, interviewing last surviving veterans before their voices are silenced forever. Helps me preserve these stories, not as propaganda, but as a warning, as a reminder of what war really means. Not heroism, survival, trauma, and the long shadow that violence casts on souls. What impressed you the most? The technical perfection of the 3 attacks, the ice-cold nerves of Werner von Rittberg, or the tragic fact that the most brilliant U-boat commander of the war was ultimately destroyed by his own excellence? Many viewers have shared incredible family stories, grandfathers who served in the German Navy, U-boat men who came back and never spoke about what they saw, or who didn't come back. If you have family stories from the U-boat war, share them here. Every comment is a piece of history that we preserve together. Every story reminds us that behind every name, every wreck, every torpedo, there was a human being, with dreams, with fears, with a family waiting. The German U-boat force lost 30,000 men. The Allies lost 72,000 sailors to U-boat attacks. 102,000 lives. For what? For steel on the seabed. And names on monuments. Werner von Rittberg sank 33 ships. He carried 1,247 names until his death. That's the real balance sheet of war, not victories. Weights that crush souls.